Welcome back to Animal Songs, a story set to music, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb. Sometimes things just come together by the same type of invisible operations that manifest the forms in space. The disparate threads of experience will coalesce into a new picture. As the circumstances change, the landscape morphs, walls crumble, a pathway opens. You'll see what I mean momentarily. Sit back, relax, and watch the show, in your head, on screen, through the dots of your own eyes. Everywhere and nowhere at once, hovering between earth and sky and water, all of a sudden. Synchronicity. Dragonfly. Perhaps I made my discovery by accident. The old man could have left his quarters unattended on purpose. He could have done everything out of blind instinct or mystical intuition. For whatever reason, with his secret silver domain unprotected, it was only a matter of time before I found my way back. The events of my life had become a misshapen dream. What was past, what was real? Had I ever set sail, let alone crashed my ship upon the shore? I had at least undertaken my meandering quest for the port of Boston, but I couldn't remember if I would ever board the SS Paramore, which now seemed like a ridiculous name for a cargo carrier, or if my scattered recollections of scaly tales, stout New Englanders, nights in the crow's nest, and my improvements on various sailors' knots, if all of these visions were the ramblings of an overactive imagination. I felt like I was losing my mind. My future awash in a tide of mystery, I thought I would at least find purchase in my past. I called my mother. In my Boston apartment, I sat cross-legged on the orange hardwood floor with my back pressed against the white plaster wall, the antique square cell phone held tight against my ear. My fat mattress loomed over me. I kept my attention on my left big toe, where the nail was overgrown and so particularly satisfying to flick. Sonny. Hi, Mom. What's the story? Survive final exams? I might have to repeat. The whole year? Ha ha. So what's new? Oh, not much. I'm actually calling to ask you a question. Shoot. Do you remember when we found that bat on the beach? No. Really? I have a pretty vivid recollection. Remind me. We were at Tata's house, and you and I were walking along the shore collecting seashells in my yellow bucket. Oh, you loved that bucket. I remember when it got washed out with the tide. You were so upset. Yes, I have a very clear memory of Dad swimming out into the ocean after it. I asked if it was going to float all the way to China. The water stretched forever. I remember him disappearing into the horizon. I'm not sure about that. I think he just bought you a new one. Okay, well, you don't remember walking along the beach and at the end where there were all those big boulders where the crabs would congregate? Lying there was an enormous bat. Was it dead? My left big toenail seemed to be growing before my eyes, which is of course impossible to observe. I mumbled responses to my mother while I considered this phenomenon. You never see it grow a centimeter, and then one day it's time for a trim. I love you. I love you too. At this age, or being this age again, I could go back to or continue biting my nails with my teeth, and when I was young it had been a special pleasure of mine to maneuver my leg and curl myself into a yogic Ouroboros, the better to take control of my personal hygiene. When or if I had been a sailor, after several years of grinding my teeth and of course gnawing on keratin, eventually one night in the dining hall biting into a particularly old crust of bread, I'd cracked my right front tooth, resulting in a roguish smile for which the other crew members congratulated me. I was a man now and there was no going back. Of course, none of us had known about magic. I was a boy again, with nothing or really everything to lose. My strongest memories in either direction in time were turning out to be fantasies. I needed the simple satisfaction of folding myself into a circle and chewing on my own foot. I started on the hard orange callus on the side of the toe. The salty taste reminded me of my aimless walk to the ocean, and I gladly sank my front teeth into the thick flesh. Thin strips of yellow meat tore away between my big square chompers, and I sputtered and spat the particles across the room. Bending my leg farther, I let myself fall onto my back, my right leg straightened across the floor planks, while my left limb was folded against my chest, so that I was tucked into a position very common for newborn babies, sucking on my big toe. Everything flickered. I shut my eyes tight and tried to ignore the shimmering white light. I tried to forget about bats and ships and the puzzle of when and where I was. I focused my frustration through my teeth and into that overgrown thumbnail of an ape's foot. The salt I tasted now was from my flooding eyes. I was confused and I was alone. When I popped my lids again, the room was white. All I could say was no, through my mouthful of toenail. The hook of crisp, clear material fell from my lips and floated, feather-like, to rest on the floor beside my head. Afraid to look around the room, I kept my attention on the nail, and sadly watched as the fragment was absorbed into the glittering structure of the ivory floor. This must be a dream, and I only had to open my inaccessible eyes to that other plane to return to the firm foundation of the rule-abiding world common to all. Yet the longer I stared at the floor, it seemed, the more engrossed in this impossible reality I became. Every detail of that crystalline surface magnified. In fact, it wasn't blank at all. Each of those shimmering sparkles was a different color. This material was a body composed of infinite points of light, all the varieties of the rainbow. What had seemed at first to be a simple space, uniform and blank, was really the breadth and scope of the universe. Better look somewhere else, I murmured. With no other recourse, I resigned myself to explore the wizard's rooms, and I prayed that we would not cross paths. He would only cause me further pain and confusion. The room, I was relieved and then depressed to find, was exactly as I remembered. The space was dominated by a thick ivory couch with 3 cushions, 1 long arched back piece, and scrolled arms. It melted into the floor with only a light seam of darkness around the base, revealing it to be separate. In front of this piece of furniture was the oval coffee table, similarly white, and I now saw that each of its forelegs were clawed like eagle talons, gripping tiny orbs. Once I'd noticed this detail, the animal theme, that perhaps had always been present here, suddenly leapt out at me. The bookshelf on the right wall was very much a honeycomb. The round wood door, the only object in the house that was not white, was set with a small cross-barred window of opaque glass, which on closer inspection revealed itself to be etched with cartoonish owl's eyes, one in each pane, like the back of a clever moth. I walked around the room to the small kitchen behind the couch, where I discovered a pattern of dancing mice outlined in the white tile backsplash. The metal sink even seemed now to me to be a long-necked ibis with 2 screws on either side of the faucet serving for eyes. I had been dreading the wizard's appearance, but these visitors, even if they were only likenesses and impressions, put me at ease. I didn't feel so alone. "Hello," I called, but there was no response. "If this is a dream," I said to the dripping ibis, "then I might as well enjoy it." First, I crossed the room to sit on the couch, but a sudden fear flashed across my mind. The wizard could change shape. I wasn't about to sit in his lap. Instead, I turned my attention to the bookcase, where at least if the old trickster should turn out to be hiding, I would only end up shaking his hand or pulling his nose, or... I sighed. "Maybe it's best if I just stand here," I declared. The most horrible voice responded. It sounded like a child speaking through a cheese grater. It said, "Why?" I jumped, turned immediately, and noticed for the first time on the tiny portion of the wall forming the corner beside the bookcase where the kitchen ended, there stood a dark portal. Sitting in this doorframe, glaring at me with reptilian eyes, was a silver cat. It was our first time meeting, and he was clearly not impressed. "Why?" he demanded again. Accidentally, why? I don't know. I think I turned the wrong direction when I was biting my toe. Why? I was starting to catch on to the game. "Who are you? Why?" I had to laugh at myself, and that gleam of joy, as always happened around the trickster, gave way to terror. "Sir," I said. I paced towards the cat. He was the same rainbow-speckled white as the walls and furniture. He glared at me out of 2 pale bluish-gray lenses. I sighed relief. One thing I had learned so far about shape-shifting was that the wizard couldn't remove that trace, his sharp, golden-ringed irises. Whatever form he took would bear the stamp of his soul. Convinced that I was conversing with an ordinary cat, I sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the portal and acted nonchalant. "Why?" he demanded. I shrugged and rolled my eyes. He responded with his own all-too-human eye roll, and he shook his head, muttering his question. Then, in one motion, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. Many bizarre and supernatural events had taken place in my life recently, and that is the only explanation I can offer for my behavior. Why did I follow the wizard in the first place? When you crash your ship upon the shore, I hope this was all a powerful nightmare. How could I answer for my crimes? Had I really hurt those people? Had I really taken their lives? Or was it all pretend? In other words, when you meet a mad wizard in the woods and he transforms into the very goal for which you were willing to risk and destroy everything in your life, you follow him. I pushed myself to my feet and crept to the edge of the black portal. I slipped a hand into the darkness. Nothing grabbed me. I pressed my left big toe down on the unseen floor. Like that, I passed through the portal. On the other side was a very ordinary apartment. I stood in a small hallway on a thick white carpet. To my left was an open door leading to a bedroom cast in deep blue light. Standing in the center was a bed, hastily made, covered by a turquoise quilt. A steel guitar leaned against one corner. I had to poke my head back through the portal to the gleaming living room to make sure that I was in the same place. This was the wizard's bedroom, and he was evidently a musician. When I looked ahead, I saw the cat sitting at the end of the hall before a closed door. Again he spun and he nudged the door open to pass into a room with, I could see, red painted walls. I paced along the carpet. On my right was another door leading to the wizard's bathroom, a porcelain tile space, like anyone else's. The silver faucet, like the ibis on the other side, slowly leaked a fat droplet. My steps were accompanied by this subtle rhythm. "I've been here before," I intoned, "in days gone by." I did not mean to say this. Finally, I pushed open the door at the end of the hall and entered the sacred space, the Red Room, where my story really began to take shape. When I set out to explain the mysteries of the Persians, I tried to tell these things directly. Many of my listeners lost their minds. The self is not immutable. Some minds are firmly set, and when they come into contact with thoughts that shake their foundation, these souls respond like any other entity under attack. Their owners seek to exterminate the threat. I have been personally attacked relentlessly by these immature selves afraid to die and be reborn with the knowledge of birdsong. It was not my place to introduce these secrets to the waking world. Yet, what can I do with my lonely truths? Here I am on this shore with the shattered remnants of my ship. I must construct something with the material. The graveyard is extensive, and I have spent too much time presiding over my victims. This is why we are here. The room was small and square, with bright red walls and a plaster ceiling. A bamboo mat covered the floor. Once I'd stepped into the center of the space, I turned to my right. On this wall, evidentially an emblem of the purpose for which the room was dedicated, there hung the shapeshifter's compass. It is a wooden circle as wide as a wizard's arm span, that is, roughly 6 feet in diameter. The circle is subdivided by concentric rings, and each orbit contains separate alphabets of symbols that correspond to one another. On the outermost layer, it looks very much like a Chinese zodiac written in characters, and this ring surrounds a layer of dot and line drawings resembling constellations, the Western signs. The next layer is a wheel of colored wedges, red, blue, green, and yellow, in that order. Finally, at the center is a small circle containing the master symbol, the one I had found inscribed in my notebook in my own scribblings at the beginning of my accidental journey. I-O. When I stepped into the Red Room and first beheld the compass, those letters were all I saw. I paced towards the artifact and fell to my knees so that my eyes were level with the sign. It was carved in shallow relief and filled in with black ink. I reached my hand out to touch it when Tanji spoke. "Why?" I hadn't noticed him hunched in the corner to my right. He shook his head. "Good question, my friend." I fell back on my heels and pushed myself to stand upright. "Why?" I scratched my chin and examined the compass in detail. 16 Chinese characters were etched around the outermost wheel. I knew enough about the zodiac to reason that this was not the familiar system. Here were 4 extra signs. Unable to decipher these letters, I turned to the constellations. There were 24 of these figures, so again, the ring did not describe a system familiar to me, but a few of the constellations I recognized. Orion, I believe, stood on the bottom left, roughly around the 4 on a clock. The Big Dipper was in the upper left area, around where 10 would be. There was possibly Ursa Major, down around 7. For the most part, everything was meaningless. However, the color wheel, with its arrangement of red, blue, green, and yellow, brought forth a memory. "It's a smell organ," I muttered. When I'd first entered his strange hive, the wizard had produced that cartoonish device from his sleeve, his way of explaining himself to me. Here were those same colors arranged in the same order. I took a deep breath. There was a hint of that peppery sage smell which the wizard had released, though it was barely noticeable. I looked to Tangi, and before he could say it, I thought of the question myself. Why do I know what sage smells like? As a boy, I had only heard the word. At this age, the age I was in college, the age I was supposed to be when I'd fallen through the floor this day to return to the wizard's abode, at this particular time I had no experience with sage. I would smell it in India, on voyage with the SS Paramore. My God, I said. It was true, all of it, somehow. What I realized for certain, though at this time I barely understood the implications, to Tangi in the red room I explained, I'm a shapeshifter. I was only pretending to be a boy. I understood what the wizard had meant about teaching me his trick. I was not lost at the mercy of his power, and I was far from insane. The power was mine to control. All I needed to do was to decipher the compass. Naturally, it was in that moment of joyous understanding that I fell out of the red room to land back in my own apartment. At the foot of my bed, curled against the black metal leg closest to the wall, lay my army green backpack, and I rushed to remove my notebook from it. As I pulled the hardcover journal from the bag's mouth, the Persian hymnal slipped out and fell to the floor, emitting an ordinary book's grunt. I had not opened it since the day when I'd first returned to the library, and even now I regarded the maroon leather volume with a quickening pulse. Ignoring the problem momentarily, I flipped my notebook open to a blank page and drew as much of the compass as I could remember, which was just the basic structure, the rings, the color wheel, and the 2 letters at its center. Why did I know to do this? Recording the shapeshifter's totem was less an idea than an instinct. All along, even when I thought my goal was the mystic beauty of the sea, which already perhaps is hard enough for you to understand, what I had meant by mermaid was truly what she represented. In ancient myths that mankind has preserved for their depth and bearing on reality, there are stories told about creatures, men and gods, who live below the waves. There is a famous tale. The old man of the ocean who can transform into anything is pursued by a shipwrecked man who needs his help to find his way home. There are infinite variations on the story. It is, I remember, as I remembered then, recounted repeatedly in the fragments of my hymnal, to which I presently returned. Cautiously, I lifted the book from the floor. The gold lettering glinted in the light emitting from my overhead ceiling fan bulbs. "Sir," I whispered to the cover. Turning the book sideways, I was relieved to see that the publisher's mark was no longer the winged skull crest, but it was once again the outline of a torch, the emblem of whatever scriptural publishing house had been charged with maintaining the Persian's mystic presence. I opened the book and found no absurd fairy tales. Instead, I was greeted with a biography of the Bab, the 19th century gateway, the man of mystery. Perhaps you find it presumptuous of me to link my ramblings to such a sacred item, but the Bab of which I speak is not the herald of the Baha'i faith, and this Persian hymnal is not available at your local bookstore. This book, I began to understand as I flipped through its catalog of birds, the story of their quest for the phoenix, and the various digressions concerning anteaters and seahorses, had always been intended for me alone to discover, because I, like Tangi and her friends, was about to undertake my true quest. I was going to find this publisher with the torch emblem and discover just who had written this strange book that had started me on my journey. I had read it once before, and the fragmentary quotations fogged my mind. I was still lost in time between realities, but I was beginning to connect several pieces of scattered information. When I flipped through that book, on the last page, perhaps where I'd forgotten that it had been inscribed, the final printed words of the last hymn were this repeated chant: I, oh, Beneath this refrain, drawn in pencil, in my personal slanted cipher stood the master symbol. I crossed my legs and sat on the floor, my back pressed against the mattress. Sitting so, I closed my eyes. I could feel the space underneath the bed, the emptiness around the base of my spine. Looking into the darkness of my own eyelids, several memories coalesced as I tried to recall what I could from before my insane voyage. I had found the hymnal. I had fallen through the library wall. I had found the port of Boston. The SS Paramore had taken me on board. Compared with my more clear and recent memories of the wizard, these dreams seemed much more concrete and realistic. As I stared into the darkness, however, 2 more memories flooded to the surface. I was looking at a blackness sparkling with multicolored stars, the dots of my own eyes. A long time ago, in a very different body, when I was a small boy, in Texas, I had crept into my mother's bed while she was still asleep. I was warm in that dark room, with its periwinkle carpet, heavy black curtains, and silky white sheets. I buried my head beneath the thick, cream-colored comforter, stitched with a quilted lattice, and I pressed my face into the firm mattress. There I saw the dancing lights. What were they? Those normally invisible particles were a secret. I was captivated by their presence. All along, these dancing dots were behind the scenes, and at the same time completely on the surface, animating the visible world. They were fairies, I imagined, and snuggled beside my sleeping mother, I pretended to commune with these entities. Red, yellow, blue, green. Each color was a different character. I understand their personalities implicitly. Lying there, exploring the darkness, I had come into contact with a truth so innocent only a child could properly understand it. For whatever reason, when I was first invited into his home, the wizard had recalled this memory for me. What did it mean? The answer, I felt, again, by instinct, must hold the key to unlocking my chains of confusion. Each strand of information was another link binding me to myself. I was alone in this cell, this body, this life, this mystery. I opened my eyes. He had read my mind and discovered the dancing lights. Why? Perhaps I would find the answer at Torchlight Publishing House in New York City, where I was going to move next and break the pattern in my memory to find something new. This has been Animal Songs, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb, produced by Supermoon. Find us on TikTok, YouTube, or at our website, gosupermoon.com. That's GOSUPERMOON.com. You can also find our work alongside many other talented artists at looksees.com. That's LOOK-SEES.com. This concludes the Dragonfly chapter. I wonder what spirit we will meet next. Until then, thank you for listening.
All I got to say is, glory be, the funk's on me.